Remastering a title is not an easy feat. It will always upset a part of the fanbase as it rips that also important soul from the original, often trading style and soul for that ultra photorealism. So let's pit the new Metal Gear Solid 3 remaster against the original to see how it stacks up from visuals, performance, and gameplay standpoints. I'm going to be using the most modern release of the original, which is the HD edition of the game that was ported to Steam via the Master Collection. I didn't want to enhance the game at all, with the exception of MGS HD Fix, which basically just fixes a bunch of stuff that is broken in the Master Collection. I wanted to make sure that both of these were set to their absolute highest possible graphical settings and resolutions, but as you'll soon see, this becomes a problem for the remaster. Hopefully by the end of this video we can figure out if Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater nicely renews this legendary title. There's no doubt this new version looks way more impressive than its original counterpart. Everything from the polygon count on models, more complexity to hair and beards, and environments that are now filled with so many tiny details that you could honestly stare at them all day. We're not here to gush over the fact that technology has come so far since that original game though, we're here to see if this actually faithfully remasters the game. This game is built from the ground up using Unreal Engine 5. As far as I could tell, pretty much everything is just running on that engine. They did carry over some things though, like the motion capture data, that makes this and the original game basically one-to-one when it comes to cutscenes. And it's clear from my time playing that Konami really wanted to keep this as close to the original as possible. The cutscenes again here are frame by frame to the original, and then gameplay, like where things are placed and how things move along, is practically identical when I was going back and forth. All they aimed to do here was update the visuals and also bring some modern comforts, which we'll get into. They clearly knew how serious MGS fans are, and the fact that if they changed anything without Kojima there, it would have been quite the blunder. The one thing that stood out to me as totally different from the original though was the color grading. You'll notice in these visuals that by default it lacks the iconic green post-processing effect. In the settings you can actually switch this on by switching the filters to Legacy, and whilst this does change the overall hue of the image to be more of those green tones, it does not capture how intense the original color grading is. It was a really good decision to allow people to choose realistic colors over the original filters, but I think they didn't commit enough to it. You can see here in the background the sky is natural blue on the remaster, whereas on the original it's way more green. The colours here in the original almost look like army camouflage, with the other prominent colour being this deserty yellow. That yellow is really absent here on the remaster. The same can be said for the nighttime sequences too, where the original carries this very heavy moonlit appearance with very cool undertones. The remaster, however, is going for more realism, even with the Legacy colour filter on. Onto model comparisons, there are no major facial changes, with everything being amazingly close to its original counterpart. There's no redesigns here to Snake like Capcom did to Frank West. Of course, across all the models, there is way more polygons here. This kind of detail helps a lot in shots like this, where Snake's boots now have actual 3D geometry to them, as opposed to just baking it into the texture itself. And also the plane's floor here is getting the same kind of treatment with far more 3D details than the original. The original is just basically one colour across it in this shot. Besides these impressive added details in mundane objects in this game, where it actually stands out and counts is in the characters like the end. The modern enhancements really make his eyes popping out that much more grotesque. The ability to now fine-tune how materials and surfaces react to the world's lighting make a really distinct difference between his beard to his old wrinkled skin to then his eyeballs that even have a shine to them. The PS2 on the other hand is likely just a single diffuse texture with no normal maps or any of that kind of thing, which makes the whole appearance very flat in comparison. One thing that really fascinated me about this game was the environments. Unreal is great at packing a large amount of those imperfect details that we expect from the real world, and so environments like forests, which make up a big part of this game, have always been its strong suit. The grass, for example, is so varied with extra bits of different flora spread throughout it. The ground too is populated by twigs, dead leaves, blades of grass, and even clovers. Because the original is just blades of grass and then the ground is a texture, it really does now make that transition from the grass that is heavy enough where you can sneak in to the ground much more smoother and natural. The trees have the exact same treatment, with random bits of damage and moss on some of them. The thing that the remaster lacks is stuff like god rays. These are very clearly manually placed and fake in the original, but they're nowhere to be seen in this exact location, and I couldn't find any throughout the game either. Another really cool environmental detail was the mud, because not only does it act like the original, but also I really appreciated the extra level of details here. In the original, when you get out of the water, your suit's going to be dirty to the exact point depending on how deep you were in the mud. The remaster not only kept this detail and also made it way more realistic with this fake 3D mud effect on your suit, but also if you brush past anything like leaves, it will actually stick to the mud itself. The effects in this game aren't as impressive as some of the other details. Blood looks quite generic and static, and the same can be said for Volgin's electricity, as it just doesn't carry as much aura as it did before. Fire also is great in terms of lighting. It naturally interacts with all of the different materials around it, but the actual fire particles itself don't look that much more natural than its original. All of the sleeping and knocked out icons are basically one-to-one, and the little effects around the map, like clusters of insects, are in the exact same spot. It showed how much attention to detail this project really has. The caveat to all of this really is the performance. That's what lets it down. Unreal Engine strikes again, and from my experience, running this on an RTX 3080 with an AMD 7800 X3D, I couldn't reach 60 FPS Ultra. I had to use DLSS balanced with some settings turned down to high, and even then it didn't reach a stable 60 all of the time. And I would imagine in big boss battles, for example, you're gonna see dips here and there. This isn't as bad as more recent games that I've played, but those recent games where I've had more problems have been open world games. You have to take into account that this is basically a linear game with very small areas split between loading screens. It does make you realize that there should have been more optimization here. In fact, just out of curiosity, I actually went back to Metal Gear Solid 5, which ran the Fox engine, and that's a huge open world which can run at a solid 60 FPS without any DLSS and at complete max settings. Its environments aren't as impressive, sure, but its lighting is, and at the time I remember this being one of the best looking games out there. And not only that, but because there's no DLSS or anything like that, the image is super sharp. Having to use DLSS to compensate for the lack of optimization really dumbs down just how gorgeous the visuals are. I also experienced one crash during my time, which was at the start of a cutscene. I think that's just worth noting. In terms of gameplay, there are two modes that you can choose from, Legacy and New Style. I thought that Legacy would be like MGS3, but the camera is actually more like MGS1, as it's a really top-down aerial view. From what I read online and in the menus though, it does appear that the balancing of the Legacy style is different from the New Style. Legacy is more like the original MGS3, whereas the New Style tweaks things to make the AI more improved and advanced, and overall I would imagine it would make the experience a bit easier. And I say this because I played this in the New Style to keep the camera behind Snake, and it's very noticeable just how easier the whole experience is. I suck at stealth games, but playing the original just took way more time to get used to the controls and how Snake navigates, whereas this one, everything just came so naturally to me that I was basically blitzing through the levels in comparison. And speaking of an easier experience, this game is way more accessible. There are just tons of new tips and prompts that flash up to help you along the way, which can be turned off by the way if you don't like them. And also, like I've mentioned, controls and just movement as a whole is way more intuitive. Besides that though, there isn't any abundance of UI to tell you where to go and what to do, and there's also a distinct lack of yellow paint anywhere. The animations are either very identical to the original or completely changed. Things like the way Snake walks now is way less sneaky, opting for instead a more relaxed, less hunched animation. Weirdly, like I've briefly mentioned, there is still the linear loading screens in this game. I thought that maybe they would ditch them for this, but no, they are one-to-one the same as the original. I do think maybe if they didn't have these, the performance would be even worse. This one definitely exceeded my expectations. I think Konami did an amazing job with this one. The only two major gripes that I have are the fact that the color grading just isn't the same, and also the performance. I really do, however, appreciate them sticking so close to the original, but I'm also kind of upset that they totally went with the trend of making a remaster that just pushes realism over the style and tone of the original. The soul of these older games is such an interesting topic to me because it's really borderline impossible to remaster or remake something without having to change. And unfortunately, this is one of those instances where a lot of the charm, specifically in the lighting and colors, is lacking. I don't think it's a shock that a guy called Retro Renew likes remakes and remasters, but honestly, for me, it's just so exciting to take an older game and put it into these newer engines and see it in a completely different light. I love the fact that in recent years I've got to play Dead Rising and Resident Evil 4 basically for the first time ever again, and it's amazing as a fan to give these new remakes and remasters to friends or to family and get them to experience the game that you love so much, but in a way that's way more accessible for them. These never aim to outright replace the original, and I don't think they ever should totally take them off the marketplace. When Rockstar Games did that to the original San Andreas, I think everyone collectively agreed that that was the wrong thing to do. These don't replace what's already there, they are simply a new lens on something that you already love. And now millions of people get to re-experience Metal Gear Solid 3 in a new light, and then millions of other people get to experience it for the very first time. I want to hear from you guys though. Have you played this game? And if so, what do you think of it? Also, if you're not subscribed already, then make sure to do that. And also, I want to thank the Patreons for their continued support. The link for my Patreon will be down in the description if you want to join. You can become a member from just £1 a month. Also, if you're into Metal Gear Solid content, then how about you check out my other Metal Gear Solid video, where I tackle the daunting task of figuring out which version is the best way to play on PC. See you over there.